The TV series Finding Your Roots. Anybody seen that? Yeah, I like that. And always he's got this format. He's always some famous people, two or three famous people that he's going to look back in their ancestry and find something for them that they didn't know about. And when they do, it's always he finds somebody, some ancestor back there that has an interesting story and in some way impacts the life of this present individual who's on his program that day. He finds this interesting story. So I want to read from the genealogy in Matthew 1. And Salmon begat Boaz of Rechab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. Now, there's an interesting person in there that we want to talk about. And it's found in that little book called Ruth. You know, that's an exquisite piece of literature when you find it. It's sandwiched in there at the end of the book of Judges and before you come to 1st and 2nd Samuel and Kings. And there's all this war and confusion and murder on one side and on the other side. But here in the middle of this, it's like finding a spring in a desert or picking roses out of the midst of icebergs, because this is a story about friendship, about love, about romance, and all of that. And who doesn't love a lover? All the world loves a lover, don't we? And so we want to look at this story of Ruth here. I'm sure you've read it. One of the tenderest books, and compared to modern literature, I don't think modern literature would come close to it. You know, there's a contest or something about opening lines of books. Opening lines of books that grab your attention. You remember one? It was a dark and stormy night. Now that's the only thing I know about that book. And I don't even know who the author is or what the story is about, but we know that line, don't we? Or what about this one?
Brother Price,
sorry
if you're
about
going to
that.
be a roving preacher, you're going to have a microphone.
All right, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Or maybe you remember this one. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Where's that? Dickens. Dickens. Hard to beat Dickens, isn't it? He's such a good writer, and that, of course, is Tale of Two Cities. But this story really is a story that beats even Dickens, and it would stand along with any of the best of them. It's a place where the author, the Holy Spirit, puts us down in a scenery of strange places, characters that are full of witchery, and the witchery of romance and love and poetry. And so let's go back to where this story takes place, the story of Ruth. It's a little bit south of Jerusalem, in a little town that you're most familiar with. It's called Bethlehem Ephrata, or Bethlehem of Ephrath. And there's a man named Elimelech, and his wife is named Naomi. And she's important, this Naomi, this mother. She has two little boys named Mahlon, and you won't remember them, I don't. I just happened to pick this up because I looked at the book. Mahlon and Kilian. And so she and these two little boys and her husband are living in Bethlehem, but the problem is the rains have stopped. There's no rain, and there's a great famine in the land. And Elimelech comes home at the end of the day, and he picks up the conversation where it was yesterday. He says, Naomi, we've got to do something. I can't find work. I have no food to bring in today. And she's been making bread with nothing and kneading the trough, an empty trough, as it were, and listening to the torture every day of those two boys say to her, Mama, what are we going to eat tonight? Where's the bread? And she has no bread to give them. Elimelech says, we've got to do something. And he says, I know there's rain in Moab, and they've got food there, and we can eat. Now, I don't know what these Moabites will do, Elimelech says. They may kill us. But better to kill us than to die of starvation here in Bethlehem. Naomi is sad of face. It's hard to give her consent. She says, I know we've got to do something. But you know, I'm not just thinking about now. I'm thinking about these two little boys. They're going to grow up. And we'll be in the land of Moab. And those people are pagans. And we may violate the law of Moses. They will marry some Moabite woman. He says, we've got to go. And she says, well, we'll have to. I know it's close geographically, Naomi says, but it's far off spiritually. We're going to have to be very careful about this. If we break the law of Moses and they marry Moabite women, I don't know where we'll be eternally. But she does give consent. And so into the land of Moab they go. They travel down from the mountains of Judea, cross the Jordan, move north toward Moab. Now, I don't know what kind of a reception they received there, but I got a feeling it was better than they expected, don't you? Because it isn't long till, the want of these people, of this little family, and the kindness of their hearts just reaches out to the Moabite people, and they take them in. He gets work. Things seem to be going along pretty good. They're all right. Seems to be doing okay. They settle down. The poverty lifts, and they're at home in the land of adoption. And so if they're at home, you know what those two little boys are going to do. Those two little boys are going to play with the little Moabite children, for sure. Now, they're the first Democrats. Now, that's a Democrat with a small d. That's the one that says all men are created equal, and kids see it like that, don't they? They see it like that. It doesn't matter what kindred you are or not kindred. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter even what religion you are. You're a kid, and I'm going to play with you. Come play with me. And so they play. And they grow up. And they're all very happy there. And a few years go by, and the mother and father realize, you know what? They seem attracted to those two girls that we keep seeing. And they come in one day, and those boys tell them, we have fallen in love with Orpah and Ruth. Orpah. You know Oprah, don't you? Well, they transposed the R and the P, and that's why she got it from that. That's where she got her name, Oprah. They simply transposed the R, but that's another thing. Here's Orpah and Ruth, and these two boys love them. And so they come in and they say, well, you know what you've got to understand, boys. They're Moabites, and you cannot love them. But we do. You cannot marry them. The law of Moses says that you must marry a Jewish child, or a Jewish person. You can't be married to some stranger in the land. You just about as well say boo to the waterfalls of Niagara and stop it as to try to stop young people in love. I know when my wife, we called her father, we want to get married in December, and this was November. He said, you're just kids. You can't do that. But we did that. 12/22/62. I'm so thankful for that day. And so with young people, that's and so they marry. Now, when you get an unwelcome marriage in your family, what do? What did this godly mother and father do? Well, one thing they can do is, I tell you what, if you marry them, that door is shut. Don't come in here anymore. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. I'm not going to speak to you again. You remember Fiddler on the Roof? Those Jewish girls marry a Gentile. They don't speak. Finally, the girl is pleading with her father. He says, go with God. He does finally open up and say something to her. Go with God. That's the best he can do when she goes with this Gentile to his home. But now, what do? Never speak to him again? Slam the door? Now, Naomi and Elimelech are smarter than this, and they are wiser than this. They are better than this. You know that little poem about love and not giving it? He drew a circle. Shut me out. Heretic. Rebel. A thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We took a circle and drew him in. And that's just what Elimelech and Naomi did. They drew that circle better, bigger, and they took them into their homes. Their door was open, and those boys and those wives could come in, and they took them into their hearts. You know, if you don't do that, the alternative is far worse. Far worse. And so, with that only remedy, life goes on. But then disaster comes. The husband and the father, Elimelech, die. When he passes away, the whole responsibility of the family then falls on her. The daughters-in-law see her every day, don't they? They watch her. They see her in her joy. They saw her in her sorrow. They were impressed with Naomi, with her calmness, with her serenity, with her acceptance, and with her strength, and the quiet, sure step that she makes every day, knowing that the arm of the Lord, the everlasting arm, surrounds her and cares for her. And they see that in Naomi. But there's a final disaster. Both boys die. Both of them. Now she's in a strange land, and she has no ties of blood here. She's completely alone, as it were, except for these two girls. So she makes the decision, I must go back to the land where I came from. The girls don't want her to go, but she is. So they travel to the border of Moab, and they're going to, Orpah and Ruth are going to go with her. And they're going to go and they're going to stay, as, at least as far as the border with her. And so when they get to the border, Orpah hugs her Naomi around the neck, and she says, I hate to see you go, but I'm going to go back. She sobs, and we can almost hear her as she turns, and as Orpah moves down the road, and she's going off, but it's Ruth's turn. Ruth grabs Naomi around the neck, and she holds her tight. She won't let her go. Naomi pats her on the back. Now, you tell you what, you've got to go. Your sister is on down the road there. You go, and you'll have a husband, and you'll have a home, and you'll have children, and you go on. That's when these beautiful words fall from her lips as she whispers in the ear of Naomi. Entreat me not to leave you, nor to return from following after you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Where you die, I will die. And there will I be buried also. Your God, your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. When I die and I'm buried there, the Lord do more also to me, if anything but death separate you and me. You can't beat that for love, can you? You can't beat that at all, in any way. When she says, your people will be my people, and your God, my God, that's quite a step. And so, she stays with her. And they turn, and they travel. And the little town of Bethlehem is treated to some strange sight. Well, there is Naomi. We knew her years ago. They're not too receptive to her. And there's that pagan girl with her. What's she doing with her? And they come to the village, and there's a lot of gossip in town about Naomi and this pagan girl. But they've got to do something. They're homeless, they're penniless, they have nothing there with them, and so they find a place to stay. And Ruth is not going to be a burden. So Ruth says, I'll go into the fields and I'll glean. And it's harvest time, and I'll get us enough wheat and bread, and we can maybe sell a little of it, and we'll make and buy the other things. So Naomi says, okay, you go. So she goes to the field. Now there's the providence of God, I believe. What field does she go to? I mean, there are fields all around Bethlehem. It's an agricultural town. But she goes to the field of Boaz. Now, Boaz is a rich man. He's got a number of fields, and he's got lots of workers, and he's a generous man. He's a kind man. He's a religious man. He is a good man, and I like to think he's good looking. Like Ruth. But she goes to that field, and she's there gleaning, and guess what the providence of God does for us? That day, he comes to that field, and he sees her almost right off. Who is that? Who's that girl that's among our workers following at the end of the line there? Oh, that's that girl that came with Naomi back to town. He said, I tell you what you do. You go over there and you tell her she can drink from our water jugs anytime she wants to. He's attracted to her. He goes over and he talks to her himself when she comes to the water jug, and he said, I tell you what, Ruth, when we have lunch today, you eat with us. You eat at our table. And I tell you what, now you stay close to our ladies, because I've told our foreman he is to take care of you and not let anything happen to you. You stay with us. Sounds like a good deal to Ruth. So, the day's over, and she comes home. Well, Naomi says is busy taking the wheat that she brought in and starting to get supper and grind it up and do whatever's happening and has to be done to get supper going. And she says, well, Ruth, how did the day go? And she said, and she can just see she's a little bit flushed in the face. And she says, it just went well. She said, I met a man named Boaz. Her head goes up. Naomi looks, her eyebrows rise, and she said, you met a man named Boaz? Yeah. And he let me eat there. Well, you know that. That's the story, isn't it? He's in love with her, and she's in love with him, almost from day one. You know how that goes. Happened with me. Just happens the way love is in chemistry. Well, it happened with this young couple. And Naomi sees this. She knows it. And so, after all these convoluted arrangements and traditions that take place in their day and time, they get married. And they live happily ever after. That's not the story completely, is it? That's not all of it. When they come back and when they are married and live happily ever after, as it were, what lessons can we gain from this story? What is there to gain for us? Well, I tell you, when you look at this, the heroine of the story, it's not Ruth, is it, really? That's not the hero act that we see. We like hero. We like Ruth. She's lovable. She's winsome, isn't she? But the real story is Naomi, isn't it? That's why the Holy Spirit gave us this story. Ruth is there, yes, And Ruth marries Boaz. And the record says that Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. And we know the rest of the genealogy that's important too. But the reason that Naomi is important, I would not diminish at all the role of Ruth, none at all. She's, after all, the reason we're looking at the story. We've found the ancestor that makes the story, haven't we? But beyond that, the real thing is that this woman, Naomi, if it had not been for Naomi, where do you think Ruth would be? She'd be a pagan girl in the land of Moab. But that's not where she is. And so, what lessons can you and I glean from this? If you and I were privileged to sit down in our Father's house today and sit down and talk to Naomi, we'd ask Naomi, tell us about this. Tell us. And she'd say, this truth is important that you need to know. Life's greatest losses, by God's grace, can become our greatest gains. You know, she says, it was days of black despair. We were starving to death in Bethlehem. And poverty drove me to Moab. But in Moab, I found Ruth. Look what I found. You and I can see that. She tells us not only that, but when we were at home in Moab, my husband died and my sons died. And that forced me back to Bethlehem. And that's how Ruth found Boaz. You see, Naomi could see that in all of these calamities of life, the providence of God is working. And you and I have a hard time coming to that. When we go through that, and we say with Ruth, you know, I don't know why I don't know why I'm like that, why it's happening to me. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to trust in God. And that's why Paul said in Romans 8 and 28 that we trust in Him always. All things work together for good to them that love God and are the called according to His purpose. You see, Naomi kept that faith. She kept that trust through all of those difficult times. She couldn't understand it, and you and I may not understand it while we're going through it. We may not understand it in all of experiences of life, but by and by, in the by and by, we will. We'll know all things then, and He'll explain them to us. But we trust in the Lord with all our heart. Lean not to our own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. And that's the first lesson. And the second lesson is, if you would talk to her, she would not think about this, maybe to tell you, the power for blessing that may be in one consecrated life. Here was Naomi, this hidden, obscure woman in Bethlehem, driven by hunger to a land of pagans. Why? To find Ruth. You know, you and I are related to Jesus. You say, oh yeah, I know. We're all children of God by faith that was in Abraham, the same faith. You know, we're spiritually, no. Jesus' blood and your blood and my blood are mixed together. He has a Gentile in his past. He's not pure Jew. He's got some Gentile blood in him. He's got part of you and me in him, and we've got part of him too. You see, Naomi would have said, I didn't know when I traveled there what my destiny was. I never dreamed that we would enrich the world like Ruth did through this son. But these are the great light bringers of all centuries. She brought light to the life of Ruth. For this simple reason, she led Ruth to the knowledge of God. That's why we may think Naomi is so important. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Now, you can't make a better confession of faith than that, can you? A stronger faith. How did she come to that? How did she come to believe that these Jewish people would be lovable and winsome and that she could live with them? How did she ever come to that? By her association with Naomi. She knew Naomi. And she could see her and she knew what she was like. And she not only knew that, but she came through Naomi. It came through Naomi that she understood about God and came to a knowledge of Yahweh. Well, by and by, the angel of suffering comes, and Ruth is rocking a little baby in her arms, and his name is Obed. Ruth begat Obed. Years go by, and there's another baby born, and he's got sunshine in the tangle of his hair, and he's got a heart full of songs, and they're pent up in him, and we watch him as he battles with sin, as he lives, as he writes all these songs, and we come to know and love David, that great king. And he's Ruth's grandbaby. He's this Gentile woman's grandbaby. Well, more years go by. And there's another baby born. And a light breaks out on the Judean hills like you've never seen. And there were shepherds abiding in the fields, keeping watch over their flocks by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. He's one of Ruth's grandbabies too. He came through Jesse and Obed as well, and Boaz. He's her grandbaby. You know, in the purpose of God, neither David nor David's greater son would have been possible without Naomi. One woman, true to God, made this roadway through which the Almighty passed over to accomplish His task of bringing salvation to the world. This woman, Naomi, this mother-in-law, the butt of all these jokes and sometimes the dynamite that wrecks marriages, but Naomi, a consecrated life. And she brought Ruth to God, and through Ruth, He brought us salvation through her sons. And we're thankful for them. That's the lesson, I think, from the book of Ruth for us. If you're here this morning subject to the invitation that you are not a part of and you don't have this salvation that Jesus has brought, He's willing to give it to you. He's paid the price. It's free to you. He paid the cost. If you're subject to that invitation, won't you come while we stand and sing?